Hello, this is Scott Eustace with Gulf Restoration Network talking to you today about public lab and the efforts toward holding government and business accountable with low-cost environmental monitoring tools on the Gulf Coast. It's a presentation I gave to the Citizen Science Association on the ways in which low-cost monitoring tools in the hands of people affected by environmental degradation and restoration is changing the way we do business in the Gulf South. My organization, the Gulf Restoration Network, is part of a Gulf Future Coalition that has met and discussed goals for what the future of the Gulf region should be and what monies from the fines levied against polluters like BP should go towards. And there's three things: education about environmental impact and monitoring, outreach about the environment and the importance of clean water and clean air, and monitoring of the environment, both of the large amount of industrial facilities we have on the Gulf Coast, as well as the government's restoration. Because we know that sometimes our states on the Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, don't always spend their money on what they say they'll spend their money on. It's up to citizens to hold institutions of government and corporations accountable to their word. It's up to the people most affected to ensure that these restoration projects function like they should. Public Lab has a history of forming after the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, and in the wake of the media blackout that followed a large amount of environmental impacts across the coast. Public Lab started as grassroots mapping, a listserv which engineered a low-cost solution to taking images of the affected marshes across Louisiana's coast. The crisis and the attention toward the disaster just enabled people to organize, despite the media blackout, to take images of the Louisiana coast and participate in a open science, open engineering, open hardware movement to build these low-cost aerial monitoring tools. That is the balloon, kite, and mapping. The Public Lab organization was created to create these wiki pages so we could communicate with each other on how to do this, where the resources are, and what not to do, which is just as important. By 2014, though, the organization formed a nonprofit, got foundation money, and organized people in many different ways, not only a listserv and a website, but through annual barn raisings or by sponsoring mini barn raisings, in multiple regions across the United States. They also hired a specific organizer on the Gulf Coast to carry forward those same monitoring activities. So, 5 years later, we no longer have the attention of the world. There are other disasters. We don't want any more disasters, please. But it takes an organizing effort to sustain the kind of community around open science and low-cost environmental technologies that once was sustained by mere attention. But what is the tool? What has been developed? What the grassroots mapping toolkit, or the balloon mapping kit, that's actually sold as a kit on the Public Lab website. But it's also a series of practices that don't cost a lot of money or take a lot of time. It meets us where we are on the Gulf Coast. For the price and time of a boat trip, you can take a piece of cheap, mass-produced hardware like an old point-and-shoot camera. It's repurposed as a satellite. It gives you high-resolution imagery if you put that camera 300 feet in the air. That's centimeter resolution. That's very, very precise resolution. It can tell you a lot about your environment, tell you the species of plants it can easily tell you where the land and water is, which is a common problem we have in Louisiana, or how much of a newly established restoration project is actually growing plants. But really the heavy lift is taking those pictures from that camera that's been hacked, that cheap mass-produced hardware, and interpreting it as data. And that heavy lift comes, according to the public lab method, usually in the source of open source software, cloud-based software. In the case of aerial mapping, it's mapknitter.org. But also communication among a network of experts, both advocates on the ground, technicians engineering the technology, engineers, but then social scientists, but also local experts, people who know where the oil is in a particular area. To turn expertise into a workflow that can incorporate local knowledge and sense. And for 2 hours more, you have some usable data in mapknitter. Just like the Barrier Islands Comprehensive Monitoring Project. You know, when we first started monitoring Barrier Island restoration program in the 80s, it was just a geologist with a video camera, those large video cameras, stuck out the door of an airplane, and they filmed flying over the beach. Well, these days, you can do that with a little point-and-shoot digital camera for not a lot of money and not a lot of time, with a balloon or a kite. Here's us in action, on the fly, constructing a camera rig, the thing that will hold the camera in place, pointed straight down at the marshes we're trying to photograph, on the boat, on the fishing vessel. So we're just out for a boat trip. It's the same amount of time, but in that time we're engineering a camera rig and putting it up on a teacher, a classroom designed weather balloon to take pictures of the marshes and get that data. So documentation is key. You know, what were the conditions of the environment when we recorded that photograph? What was the light? What was the wind? How high was the tide? That's a critical piece of information, because that's going to tell you how much marsh you can see with a camera hanging from a weather balloon. So documentation is key, and the Public Lab website provides a web logging platform to document things like the weather, ground, truthing shots, etc. So that's all the ingredients of grassroots mapping. Documentation is important. Just need the time that we have in a boat trip to use cheap materials to give us some good data that can be processed with open source software. And we need a community of people to build the software and to communicate with each other for troubleshooting. In Barataria in 2014, Public Lab went back into the marshes as documented in 2011. And we had a community at that point, as well as a funded effort to support 8 to 10 trips, where we trained 6 people each, people who had never touched the balloon or kite, to learn how to build the kits and fly the kite or balloon, to document 20 sites around northern Barataria Bay, which was an area which was particularly impacted and had a lot of shoreline change, both from the erosion that's part of the ongoing coastal crisis in Louisiana and BP's oil. So there's a lot to this. There's a lot of this actually produces data on shoreline change. As an environmental advocate myself, it produces photos that show people the beauty of the marsh as well as its vulnerability. And it establishes a line of communication between myself and scientists who are studying in the marsh. They can use these photographs to describe particular processes that are they're happening. It also provides us, look at this beautiful photograph taken at 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the marshes. You can see the different species, the sinuosity of the bayous, the mud flats. It's just a beautiful photograph in and of itself, and it gives me some wherewithal to keep pushing, because we still have so much beauty left to preserve in Louisiana despite all of our injuries. So by 2012, in the wake of the disaster, we had quite a few maps Public Lab made across the Gulf Coast, all the way from Terrebonne Parish to Mobile Bay. And a lot of them are up on Google Earth right now. If you turn it on and use the history function to go back to fall of 2010, you can see a lot of these aerial photographs generated by many different teams of people across the coast. We'll look at just one of those dots down in northern Barataria Bay. This was the kind of picture you can get. You can see the extent that you can get in one trip with a balloon flown high above the marsh on a boat tracking the shoreline, an oiled shoreline in northern Barataria Bay. And this provides, a much higher resolution than the default photograph, which is, it's also dark. It's not the greatest photo. But this is a screen capture of Google Earth, and in Google Earth you can zoom in even closer. You can see the differences between the resolution of the balloon photograph and the USGS photo. Even closer to get you explicitly to the 10-meter area of black that where the oil washed over. You can see explicitly the clumps of the Spartina grass where it grew back and where it didn't along the shoreline, where the shoreline is eroding heavily. This is a very shallow water area. You shouldn't have that. You can see that those cliffs, they're marsh cliffs. You can see that the marsh platform drops about a foot, given the resolution of this photograph. You don't get that in the default photography. You can see the gradations of different kinds of green, and you see the shadows present from the grass itself. You can very easily tell, in a matter of feet, where the marsh is and where it isn't, and where it's growing well and where it's growing but not growing so well. Where it's so there's a lot of information in this 2011 imagery. Some of this imagery was taken in a period after marshes have been raked, and so we can evaluate whether or not that marsh platform, that denuded brown area that was once green before BP's oil, is that land still there? You take the grass away from wetlands, and the roots are what's holding the land in place. So usually very quickly it disappears, but do the roots remain in those areas? Were the plants able to recolonize? This is kind of our baseline post-response, where the marshes have been cleaned but denuded photography, and it has a lot of high detail. So with that, we can very easily create, it's almost silly to create these land water designations from such high resolution photography. But we use the standard method of considering the color, shape, texture, tone, pattern, and our actual site visit, because that's the advantage of this kind of aerial photography, is that you're already ground truthing your photograph as you take it. Where people taking the photograph are in the boat that's in this picture. And you can easily make a land water delineation and measure the change across, a certain 3 or 4 transects. So we have some preliminary results, although, according to our grant, a lot of our results were just training people that they too can take these images. It's not hard, as Anna learned that day. It's pretty fun. And this is an initial image. This is just one picture of the marsh. Again, it's a beautiful, compelling image with a lot of detail. What is that white washed up on the shore? What is that yellow in the middle of the marsh? Is that a sulfur signature? Is that some kind of pollution? What's those different shades of black in the water? Is that remnant oil? Is that organic material that's decomposing? I mean, there's just so much in one picture. Yeah, there's a lot of results to look at. But, mainly we wanted to look at shoreline change. So we plugged each one of these photos into MapKnitter, compiled them, into maps of the shoreline, and we produced a report analyzing 4 different sites pictured with balloon and kite photography. Both in 2011 and 2014, and gave different erosion rates for 4 different areas based on multiple measurements in each area. It also is good, this technique can also document restoration well. At the beginning of this restoration project, we just had all water at the mouth of Bayou St. John at Lake Pontchartrain. Lake Pontchartrain Basin took a river dredging project and added a little money to it to create some wetlands on either side of the dredged channel that's marked with those dots, which are just channel markers, poles seen from above. So we've been planting and restoring the site. If you're in New Orleans, you should come out. It's allowed us to see the sediment footprint and track it, because once the sediment is placed, it doesn't quite stay in place. It's allowed us to document where channels should be dredged for flow of waters in and out of these created marshes. It allowed us to document our results. What did the volunteers do from week to week? And it also has documented this in the upper left of the photograph there, this shell bar, which is an accident. It was a pile of shells left by the contractor under the bridge. A storm washed it in, and it's now slowly washing over plants that have been planted. So we've used the photograph. That thing is migrating with every storm. It needs to be tracked because it's having an effect on the plants. It's being somewhat managed, but tracking that problem with this project allows the manager to deal with it, to compensate, to plant in the areas, and plan to plant in other areas that haven't been affected yet. I like this because you can actually see Andy from Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, who's responsible for this great project, in the backhoe building land in the picture while he's doing it. So he loves this picture too. You know, for 30 minutes, you can get a kite up, get a picture, and you can get enough detail to do things like stem counts, which is insane, if you really wanted to focus on a particular area. But you very easily get something like percent cover at time, which is a common metric that the government uses to determine the success of a marsh creation project. So, you know, the photography, if you take a little 10 megapixel point and shoot camera, the resolution is measured in centimeters, and you can compare this to 6 inches of resolution that your Homeland Security data set has. But you can also deploy this technology more often than you can fly a plane, contracted with USGS. You can capture events like the movement of that shell bar, like a pollution event, like an ephemeral restoration that only lasts during the summer or for 1 year. We've used it to capture the blooming of submerged vegetation. Usually USGS flies in the fall or the winter, does not capture all that submerged vegetation. We fly in the summer. The weather is more tempestuous, so the government tends not to look at those. There will be cloud cover that comes. We fly under the clouds, no problem. It's a lot more. This technique's a lot more adaptable to weather conditions and can capture temporary situations much better than the existing program. I mean, we still need the USGS to be taking these photos for Google Earth, but we can supplement them well and target, projects that are a mile wide with the balloons and kites. So as far as the development of the process for citizen science, it's evolved where Public Lab is concerned. In 2011, the attention to the crisis made it much easier to recruit volunteers, and many more photographs were taken. Many more people trained themselves on this technique. In 2014, we needed an organization and funding, but Public Lab plays a great facilitating role in making the Barataria project happen. The organization and the community has grown and matured, so we have manuals to instruct us in the process, methods of documentation and instant communication. And we have ideas about what lies in the future. At the Gulf Restoration Network, we have a focus on the urban flooding problem in our concrete lily pad in New Orleans and the need to re-engineer our pumps so that the rain doesn't flood us out so much. Call that our Flood Less New Orleans campaign. And the water only sits where we don't want it to for half a day before the pumps come in. But we can use this technique to document that urban flooding. It's an ephemeral event, but it's a large event, a block scale or more. There's a grassroots vegetation index. It's now developed into a whole kit, the Infogram kit. It takes a hacked GoPro knockoff, the Mobius Action Cam, which is very light, so it's very easily lifted by a kite. And using a certain red filter and removing the near-infrared filter. Instead of red light, you get the near-infrared light, which can tell you that near-infrared can give you proxy information for photosynthesis. So it can tell you how much photosynthesis a plant or an area of plants is undergoing, and give you a general indicator of how healthy that area is. This is needed for land management of moving landforms. We have a need for conservation geology in Louisiana. Everything is moving all the time. We need to track how much land we have because it keeps us safe from storms and it produces so much of the food that we eat. There's been talk of doing bird counts with these data. In some cases, the kite does intimidate birds. In other cases, the kite can be so high it doesn't matter at all. But you still get resolution enough. I think 2 centimeter is the kind of the industry standard for tracking and identifying species of birds. So it could be used in animal counts during the daytime. And then industrial monitoring and monitoring pollution events. Here's some of a delineation I made from a kite photograph where the water sat on the landscape after a rain. The light blue was areas, some of which were planned to be flooded, other which were not. The empty blue ring was a place that was planned to be flooded but was really well drained. So it was a planned wetland that didn't stay wet, so it was drained too well. Interesting problem. The Infogram, as I said, replacing the red channel with a near-infrared channel that give you where the photosynthesis is happening, where it is not. You can see it's really great for determining where the water is in a picture because water sucks up that near-infrared and turns completely black in the top right of that photo. So it's great for wetlands because in the summer, sometimes in wetlands you don't know exactly where the plants stop and the water begins. Taking a near-infrared photo can help with that, give you that really clear delineation. We have a 2-camera method, a 1-camera method for that. We've also looked in monitoring the movement of Grand Isle and birds at Grand Isle. That's Matt and Julia helping me monitor with the kite the movement of sand spits on Elmer's Island, actually, down in the Louisiana coast. And then enforcement of the Clean Water Act. This is a pollution event. Granted, it was happening over a week, probably. But there was so much coal falling off of this coal export facility and into the Mississippi River that there was actually a pile forming under their conveyor belt in the top right of the picture. This is the oil tanking United Bulk facility in Davant in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana. They have a long history of violating the law, and our organization has used this and other photographs to document their discharges. This photograph was particularly helpful because the kite got us so low that we were able to see that pile, whereas when we flew over with the airplane, we couldn't really see it in good enough detail to describe the ongoing problem at this facility. Not only, from the airplane, we could see that black plume in the water. Clearly something is wrong. They're in violation of their narrative standards of the Clean Water Act that says no floating material on the river, and there's tons of black plumes. So we captured the violation with the airplane, but the kite is what gave us that picture of enough detail that there's a pile forming underneath the conveyor that really got the agency's attention and spurred the company to do something after we filed in court, of course. Future directions. There's more work to be done with the infogram project. I'm happy to report it's taken off. There's a lot of discussion on how to easily convert a photograph just as it's taken in the camera. You throw it up on the website and it converts it almost instantaneously into a vegetation index. And there's a need for more community involvement. So there's we have different campaigns to fund engagement work and to annotate the maps once we've taken them. So you can help us, of course. It wouldn't be a nonprofit without a pitch. You can either donate to the nonprofit or buy a kit and try this out yourself. The kits are sold, the materials, it's mostly at cost, so it is low cost and easy and intuitive to try. So I recommend that you try it out. And with that, I'd just like to close with a lot of thanks to the Patagonia Corporation for funding the Barataria trips, to Public Lab, to Shannon, Matt Lippincott, Jeff Warren, all of the others in 2011 that flew, Stuart Long, Adam, as well as everybody who came on the boat with me for the Barataria project, Stevie, Alexis, Grace, Jordan, Jody Dunmore, Bulldog Charters, you know who you are. Everyone who collaborated in this community data collection process to document the eroding marshes of the Louisiana coast.